everybody, welcome back to the channel. It's Amit. I want to talk today about something that you might have heard of before, and if you have heard of it, then no worries, you don't need to watch the video, but you might not have heard of this, and this is a really, really interesting piece of due diligence that has existed for a while, but I've never really taken seriously. I've seen it in headlines, but I finally did some digging and tried to understand ultimately why this was important and how this influences my investment decision in Palantir, which is that Bernie Madoff was convicted thanks to the mysterious Palantir technology, which is a headline from this title back in January 12th, 2015, when it was published. I want to do a couple things in this video. Number one, I want to talk about why Palantir Technologies was able to actually capture Bernie Madoff and his pyramid scheme. I want to talk about what Bernie Madoff and his pyramid scheme was. So for those who've never heard about it before, I think it's really interesting and important to understand what Bernie ended up doing that cost a lot of people a lot of money. When I mean a lot of money, I'm talking about the billions of dollars. This is how intensive a pyramid scheme that was. And then I want to talk about why this means the anti-money laundering solutions that Palantir offers, which I did an entire video on about a month ago that you can check out to go more in depth on it, does mean that the company has a very strong potential in cybersecurity and just security in general for companies that need these types of solutions to be able to scale heavily in the commercial sector. So let's get into my laptop. Let's talk about this article. Let's get deeper into it. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to talk about is what Bernie Madoff and his Ponzi scheme actually did. So we have a good article here that says Ponzi schemes are run by a central operator who uses the money from new incoming investors to pay off the promised returns to older ones. This makes the operation seem profitable and legitimate, even though no actual profit is being made. Meanwhile, the person behind the scheme pockets the extra money or uses it to expand the operation. A Ponzi scheme is like a pyramid scheme in which there's no real way to win. It's just stacking the pyramid on top of each other till at the end, one day it eventually has to collapse. So what Bernie Madoff did is he collected a lot of money from investors. He got their trust that he was going to invest the money, and he never actually gave them any returns. So to avoid having too many investors reclaim their profits, Ponzi schemes encourage them to stay in the game and earn more money. The investing strategies used are vague or secretive, and all they need to do is tell investors how much they're making periodically without actually providing any real returns. The investors are happy to keep their money in there because they know that their investments are doing well, so why would you take it out if your investment's doing well? You even give more money to the person who's operating this Ponzi scheme because you don't know it's a Ponzi scheme, and that money ends up being pocketed by the central operator of the Ponzi scheme, and it's used to fuel more of the pyramid scheme in and of itself. Ponzi schemes aren't sustainable. The setup eventually falls apart after the operator takes the remaining investment money and runs. New investors are harder to find, meaning the flow of cash ultimately dies out. So in Madoff's case, things began to deteriorate after their clients wanted the $7 billion of returns that they said that they gained in the market based off Bernie's strategies, and he only had $200 million to $300 million to give. So obviously he was down a couple of billions. And that's pretty much what happened. And he ended up getting a 150-year sentence. It was more symbolic than literal because the SEC and the court system just wanted to show that if you do this, it is going to be bad. Bernie Madoff has recently died in April 2021. So then we get to this article that says Palantir's mysterious data analysis software, according to leaked documents, showed that it was used to actually find one of the largest Ponzi schemes in history as a result of their frighteningly powerful tool set. So they had some very powerful technology. Samuel Redding, former Marine who works as a U.S. military contractor, and this was in 2015 when people didn't really know what Palantir does, said it's the combination of every analytical tool you could ever dream of. And for people who are investing in 2021, it's unique to hear that was the insight back then. You will know every single bad guy in your area. Until now, Palantir sites had rather vaguely described its services across 18 categories, including anti-fraud, law enforcement. Obviously, they didn't want to really describe what they were doing because they were more secretive at the time. But the leaked documents for the first time gave a clear picture of some actual use cases. For example, a firm hired by Security Investments Protection Corporation used Palantir software to sort through mountains of data. This is what they do, analyze data, over 40 years of records to convict Ponzi schemer Bernie Madoff, according to the TechCrunch report. This means that Bernie Madoff was convicted around 2008, 2009, and Palantir software started in 2003 over the course of those 5 years. In just 5 years, it was able to sort through all the data. And when you're investigating someone like Bernie Madoff, you're probably trying to figure out, you're trying to do pattern matching at the end of the day, right? You're trying to figure out how many investors invested here, how did the returns happen in that way, what things were promised, and you're trying to match all these different variables that come together in a centralized hub, which is what Palantir does. It takes all the data, puts it in one place, and then that software gives you recommendations based upon the data that suggests what may or may not be happening. And at this case, it suggested that Bernie Madoff was in fact guilty. So what it says here is it's used in anti-fraud prevention, and 96% of those using Palantir's products to support operations in Afghanistan currently preferred it over the military's own $2.3 billion alternative. This was a really unique insight when I read into this article, that people during this time that were using Palantir's products in the military actually liked it from a data perspective, software perspective, front end, back end perspective, over the military's $2.3 billion product that they created, because the privatized version of that, i.e. through a private company, Palantir, was simply better. And then they just go into how much money Palantir has raised over the past couple years. So really interesting stuff, and I wanted to talk about it for a bit in terms of what this means for Palantir. Number one, it shows that their technology was being used at a time in which the world didn't even know about it, right? And their technology was being used in one of the most advanced ways, because obviously it wasn't going to be leaked in 2008 that they had used their technology to find Bernie Madoff, because they were in secret mode, they were in build mode, put your head down, just like keep building the software, make it better. But years later, it comes out that they were actually the ones that were integrating all the intense level of data that it takes for the FBI and the SEC to collaborate to actually figure out who was behind this Ponzi scheme. And, you know, you're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars that are at least now being accounted for in some capacity so that the scheme doesn't continue, even if the money can't go back to individual investors, which is a net good thing for the world, right? To have less of those Ponzi schemes, because if you've ever been scammed out of your money, which I think we all have at some point if you've lived long enough, then, you know, it's just not a good feeling to have hard-worked money be scammed for, especially at the tunes of hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. So Palantir's technology was super productive in that capacity. Number two, it insinuates to me that the government is probably going to be continuing to use Palantir for a long time. Now, that doesn't mean that it's the best thing for the stock price, because Wall Street wants to see them break more into commercial and less into the government. But nonetheless, it shows that the use cases are phenomenal, right? If you're finding Bernie Madoff and like the government's using your technology and it's better than what the government's alternative is, then it starts to make sense why the Nuclear Administration gave them 90 million, Army Vantage gave them 116 million, Space Systems Command gave them 43 million. Like, it starts to make sense why they're getting all these big contracts and why they're probably going to continue to beat out all their competitors to get those big contracts. And have that money flowing in. The third thing it showed to me was this concept of anti-money laundering. So I did a video on this a while ago. I'll put it in the description. But anti-money laundering is a very, very important concept to understand when it comes to Palantir. And anti-money laundering is basically the ability for Palantir to work with banks, governmental organizations, institutions, nonprofits, whatever institutions try to figure out what organizations or potentially terrorists or even, you know, just like fraudsters are getting money from one place to another in mysterious ways so that people don't know about it, right? Being very secretive about it, which means there has to be a lot of data tracking and analyzing those patterns to be able to draw the conclusions for something that potentially might be happening. Their software is a one-of-one software that is able to get this done. Now, are there other companies that work with anti-money laundering and fraud and KYC, which is know your customer laws, which are certain specific security financial regulations? Yes. This is just a question of, are any of those catching Bernie Madoff? Right? like that's my point that I'm trying to make here. Are any of those companies that are innovating or even not innovating, but just integrating that software into companies, are they doing the things that Palantir is able to do? The know your customer anti-money laundering market is substantial. We're talking about every bank in the world outside of the companies or countries Palantir just won't work with because they don't like working with adversaries of the West, could potentially be using Palantir Foundry within their banks to be able to track anything that's going on for fraud. Fraud is always going to exist. There's always going to be bad people doing bad things. There's always going to be people trying to scam banks. I mean, with all the crypto scams and stuff we've been seeing, like, people will do anything to make a quick buck, and people will be very strategic about how they do things to make a quick buck because money runs the world. So there's always going to be a business for software to be in place that is able to mitigate that risk, or at least detect that harm before it happens, or when it does happen, to stop that harm happening in its place, because the software is able to detect those problems that exist. I'm not saying that software doesn't already exist. I'm saying if Palantir has a one-of-one software that's better than every competitor because they're using artificial intelligence and machine learning at the edge, because their software is simply more dynamic and has a better ability to integrate within siloed sets of data that exist within an entire organization and bring them in one place, then they're going to be the winner of that market. And they have to break into commercial. They have to learn how to sell. But stuff like this, going back into the past and sort of looking at what were they doing back in 2008, 2009, and how is that influencing how they're planning to scale now, is what gets me really excited about the stock, and it gets me more interested to learn even more deeper how many different use cases are there for this company. It's worked with media companies, worked with biotech companies, it's worked with advertising companies, it's worked with blockchain companies and technology companies and energy companies. And I'm just like, now it's working, to find Bernie Madoff. I mean, it's not that I didn't know they were working with the government. It's just like the use cases for this software seem to be exponential and endless. And if data is only going to get bigger, artificial intelligence only going to get bigger, then it seems like their company, their market, their opportunity to penetrate markets and perform a service they know their company can do is only going to get bigger. So that's what I wanted to present today. It was really interesting. Hadn't seen this article in a long time. Like, I had seen this article, but it was at least a couple months ago and I didn't really care about it. It was just when I was like kind of interested in Palantir. And now going deeper into the article, I just saw it the other day and I was like, wait, I think this is something I should look into a little bit more. And now that I'm a pretty active investor in the stock, it's really refreshing to know that they did some cool stuff with helping find someone who really scammed a lot of people. So let me know your guys' thoughts on this. Did you know that Palantir helped find Bernie Madoff? And if you didn't, how are you reacting to that, or any opinions you have on that? Thank you guys for watching. Look forward to reading your comments. My name is Mitt. I'll see you in the next one.